I'm here with Carol Ann Hilton, CEO and founder of the Indigenomics Institute, and Jonathan Redbird, managing partner at Pontiac Group and president of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Financial Corporation. Thank you, Carol Ann and Jonathan, for being here.
Thank you.
So I'd love to maybe kick it off with Carol Ann, if you could help situate us around what inspired you to establish the Indigenomics Institute and what is the role that you see the Institute playing on the national and international stage as it relates to Indigenous affairs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I come from the Nuu-chah-nulth people on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and I come from the potlatch tradition. And the potlatch itself, as a ceremony and as a way of life, is about how we relate to each other, how that is embedded within ceremony, and how our economy is foundational to that. The potlatch tradition is essentially about giving and distribution of wealth. It's about redoing the structures of time, and that we invest in our future and we invest in our abundance by our increased ability to share and our increased ability to acknowledge abundance through our ability to gift. So as the original gift economy, as the original social economy, the structures of our Indigenous worldview hold within it perspectives that I believe humanity is converging upon. My work at the Indigenomics Institute has been very much based from a personal perspective of my responsibility of being the first generation out of residential school. So my parents went to residential school and my grandparents went to residential school, and realizing the reduction of our economic worldview across time and the devaluing of that within the systems as the rise of the Canadian economy occurred here in the development of this country. What has been important to me is really changing the language and using new language to understand how powerful Indigenous peoples are. And in that, the concept of Indigenomics is really building a future state of a forward-looking target of Indigenous economic growth and inclusion, but not growth for the sake of growth. It's growth for the sake of our ability to continue as people, growth as the ability to have a right to an economy, and how much that's a fundamental concept that Indigenous peoples are the only ones in this country who have had to fight for a right to an economy. And we see that story every single day. Right now, it's expressing itself within the Federal Department of Fisheries relationship to the Mi'kmaq people, who are saying, why limit us to a moderate livelihood? There is no other people in this country that would accept the language with which Indigenous peoples are placed and limited from. So that's really the underlying intention of the Indigenomics Institute. Thank you.
That's helpful, Carol Ann. Jonathan, on the point of igniting the Indigenous economy, I know we've had some amazing discussions. So maybe at a high level, could you touch on the opportunities that you see for Canada and Indigenous peoples and your thoughts on igniting the Indigenous economy?
As Carol Ann stated, there's a coming 100 billion Indigenous economy, and it's rooted in land, water, and human stewardship. Canada needs to implement an equity tax credit to attract investors into organizations that have significant environmental and social impact. We need to give Canadians a financial incentive to invest into these organizations. As you might all be aware of Canada's invention created in 1972 called flow-through shares, which is a tax-based financial incentive that is available to the mining sector, where 100% of Canadian exploration expenses can be tax deducted and up to 30% for development expenses be tax deducted. What has been the result of this one policy change? Canada has been the leader in natural resource extraction and has become the headquarters for many mining companies in the world. The mining sector in Canada contributes $109 billion to our nominal GDP and creates 719,000 jobs. That's 1 in every 26 jobs in Canada. Now imagine an Indigenous flow-through share, where investors can invest into environmental and social impact organizations. But instead of a tool that can be used to even the playing field for investors and entrepreneurs alike, we get funds. Funds are limited access and are capital that we must compete amongst each other to have access to. This reminds me of the parable of give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for life. We must enable our investors to invest in our future businesses that utilize technology to solve climate and human crises that we face today and will be facing in the coming years.
That's a great point. And we've talked about climate change. And climate change in some cases has been viewed historically as a social imperative. I think what's becoming recognized is that it's an economic imperative. Carol-Ann, can you drill down on climate action, climate change, the opportunity to invest and bring capital into the climate tech sphere, and how this can help advance the Indigenous economy and at the same point advance climate action?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And really, where we're at as an intersection in the growth and design of the Indigenous economy is that we need to be able to convene the tools, the resources, the institutions, the structures, and the leadership. That is the perfect intersection with which Jonathan refers to, of where we can leverage the foundations of our economy, but establish those as springboards to our ability to participate, look at points of inclusion, and go beyond the old story of the limitations and challenges of accessibility or inclusion within the Indigenous economy.
We've talked about climate action and the importance of bringing more resources into the space, and how this is an area that Canada can be a global leader, but more importantly, we can leverage more resources beyond capital. Maybe can you drill down a little bit more on some of the discussion points and what you see as being the learning opportunity that we can leverage as a country?
Yeah, I'm currently the president of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Finance Corporation, and we are currently in a land and water title claim since 2003. This is for 2 million acres of land in the waters of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. And my mission as the leader of this entity is to create a future Indigenous economy, create a future Indigenous community, a community that is founded in Indigenous philosophy and leveraging technologies for all citizens to live in abundance every single day. And I just want you to think about this for a second, daydream about this for a second. Imagine your home being circular rather than a box, that is heated by geothermal rather than gas, powered by solar, built with aquaponics, greens and proteins, a home that captures water and cleans water on site, a home situated in a forest, a community with green, our children learning from nature in forest schools, our neighbors, our kinsmen and kinswomen. We live as one. We lived how we used to live prior to European contact, in abundance. And we will be open to having all peoples join us in this new lifestyle, a new way of living. And I want everyone to think about this. This is humanity's next stage of evolution, where Western and Indigenous societies come together and lead and light a new path and share in an abundance lifestyle, an abundance mindset. This is where we're going. It's inevitable. It's just how long will it take for us to get there? And this is the indigenomics that Carol-Ann talks about. This is the future potential of Canada.
I love that. Carol-Ann, when you think about where we are, we've had 12 months of pandemic. It's been unprecedented. We've accelerated into a period of massive digital transformation. And so when you think about all these different factors, is this Is it as clear as it seems to be that we're at a moment of convergence around opportunity for Canada as a country to move into a world's leading position across multiple issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that looking at a post-COVID economic recovery pathway, um, highlighting inclusion, diversity, equity into the conversation and bringing others into that um, dialogue going forward is really going to be the strong point of creating um, economic um, options and new ways of doing and new ways of being and new ways of seeing. The work of the Indigenomics Institute, I'm often asked about the target of $100 billion Indigenous economy and what that looks like within the COVID and post-COVID environment. What I'm finding is we're actually closer to $100 billion Indigenous economy than we think we are. And there's a number of reasons for that. But the target is really only a tool to be able to look at economic design in a more tangible way. We're moving away from program and service mentality to actual economic design and forward looking trajectory of the outcome of Indigenous inclusion and economic and financial leverage. So essentially, what I want to be able to center in Canadian reality is what type of decisions do we make with the assumption of a $32 billion annual Indigenous economy? And what type of decisions and how are those different at $100 billion? And if we look at facilitating the leadership tools, resources, and structures of forward looking trajectory and shape the meaning and metrics to be able to actually understand Indigenous economic strength and how that's connected to Canada's GDP, the visualization of Indigenous economic strength is at its heart what the concept of indigenomics is placing in front of the viewpoint of Canada itself. Thank you.
And so I know that we have extraordinary leaders across the country from all kinds of different backgrounds that care deeply about the issues that we're talking about. As it relates to the Indigenous economy or Indigenous peoples, we've talked about this, Jonathan. Even well-intentioned people can sometimes be insensitive or not have a full appreciation of the best way to collaborate and the best way to engage and support.
Yeah, so I think it's really important for our leaders to understand where we've come from. And it's crucial to understand that our ancestral Indigenous leaders were all fighting for our future generations. They wanted us to continue to live in this abundance lifestyle and share in the wealth of this land. Our ancestral leaders signed treaties to share the land, and it is in our culture to not own the land, the water, the air, our Mother Earth. So we agreed to these treaties. And I'll give you an example of a treaty close to home where my grandmother is from, the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850, which started with a $3 annuity plus ammunition, twine for nets, and suits for our leaders. In 1874, the government changed it to $4 annuity, removing ammunition, twine, and suits, and since then has not changed. The government failed to provide a provision to account for inflation and is currently in the Superior Court hearing at this time. Second, I want everyone to understand that the Crown Indigenous Relations in Northern Affairs Canada administers 1,200 capital accounts for 576 First Nation governments across Canada. As of August 2016, the total balance of Indigenous money held in trust was $680 million. $680 million is currently paying an interest rate of about 1.8% to all First Nation communities. Why is our Indigenous monies held in trust paying such low yields? In my opinion, the pathway forward is bringing Indigenous leaders and bringing Canadian leaders together, sitting at the same table, looking at investment opportunities locally within our region. In my opinion, if we were given a seat at this table, we would not be investing into mining, fossil fuels, or government bonds. We would be investing into the seventh generation. We would be investing into what our great Indigenous ancestral leaders were fighting for: sovereignty. Sovereignty to me is having access to clean food, clean water, shelter, security, communication. And this needs to be opened up to all Canadians, that all Canadians can contribute. And I want to lastly share with you this quote from The Good Ancestor, a book by Roman Kizernark. It states that looking 50,000 years into the past and 50,000 years into the future, assuming that the 21st century birth rates remain constant, all humans ever lived are far outweighed by those yet to come. The dead being 100 billion, the living being 7.7 billion, the unborn generation 6.75 trillion. What is our strategy? What's the Western world investing into?
Carol-Anne, you have a new book, Indigenomics, Taking a Seat at the Economic Table, which highlights the potential that can be realized on a broad national scale for Canada. And if we're able to truly leverage the Indigenous economy at its full potential. So, what are some of the primary issues that you see that you're highlighting in your book? What are some of the key takeaways for our innovation community as it relates to unlocking the modern Indigenous economy that you speak to?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. The book, Taking a Seat at the Economic Table, is highlighting a central point of building from a new truth that we can create and move away from the structures and systems and mentalities of Indigenous economic exclusion, which have fundamentally built this country. So when we look at the structures of the Indian Act and the economic system design of regression and exclusion of Indigenous people, when we can understand and look at that impact across time today, and also be able to understand that we can be better strategically in an economic position to understand that Indigenous economic strength is good for this country, that the balance sheet of this country cannot be built from the problem lens of the history of the development of Canada itself, where the Indian population was seen as a problem. Right from the very first Prime Minister all the way up to now, we are influenced by that perception of the Indigenous population. But when we actually realize the fiscal equation of this country requires Indigenous economic and social well-being, and that essentially that's the truth that we need to be able to build from. So instead of seeing Indigenous peoples as a risk or a burden, to start looking at building the structures of investability. My work at the Indigenomics Institute is establishing new language such as the Indigenomics economic mix, which are 12 levers to support the growth and design of an Indigenous economy. So looking at all of those aspects, some of which Jonathan referred to previously, the role of technology, the role of capital, the role of equity, the role of procurement, all of these as structures of economic design to support Indigenous economic generation and places of investability. What is important to me in this is that we're able to drive policy that focuses, instead of expenditure, focuses on economic design.
Jonathan, we're going to close off with you, and I'm hoping you can give us some inspirational words as we think about the future.
Yeah, in all my travels, I've been all over Turtle Island, North America, all around the world, engaging with Indigenous communities. And a lot of our leaders are talking about job creation, and that has been the focus and the metrics that we've been using. And to me, I believe that's a flawed metrics to look at. We need to focus on wealth creation. We are the unrecognized shareholders of many large industrial activities that are happening within this country. And we need to be a part of those shareholder tables, because from the shareholder position, that top-down approach, we're able to move and maneuver the companies of today into a pathway that is more sustainable. I hear young people leaving these big corporations, even though they're getting paid great salaries with great pensions and great benefits. They're leaving because the actual work of that company is not aligned to their values. And that's the future. That is what we need to be focused on, is how do we change the implementation of the value propositions that we're providing to this country and globally? How do we have human, environmental stewardship as the foremost and front-facing activity that all companies are doing, and then the business model is second? And that's what we need to do to move forward, to attract young talent, to attract young people. And we have to do it as a unison. We need the old mind, the wisdom that the elder generation has, the baby boomers have, and we need to combine that with the work ethic and the energy of the young generation, and to help them with succession, to provide them with the mentorship to lead this country into the future. And that, for me, if we had Indigenous shareholders a part of these companies, we would provide real change at a very quick pace.
This has been a really great discussion. And Jonathan, one thing that I don't want to lose is the metaphor that you gave around the fire.
Yeah, so the analogy of equality is in a fire, where in a Western home you'll find the fire against the wall, and the people closest to the fire feel the most warmth from the fire, and the people behind those people often miss out on the warmth of that fire. An Indigenous fire is in the center, and we all go around that flame in a circle, where we all experience the warmth of that flame equally. And this is what needs to be implemented in our future economy. It must be a circular economy. It must be one of Indigenous principles and Indigenous values, Indigenous philosophies. We're not going backwards. We're moving forwards. We're taking what we've learned in the past 200 years of capitalism. We're taking the advancements of technologies, and we're just reframing the structure by providing an Indigenous worldview.
That's great. I'm really appreciative of the time that you've taken to be here with us. Chi miigwech.
Chi miigwech.